Put your hands where I can see them. The command sliced through the breakfast hum at Brookside Diner like a knife through butter. Officer Kate Ashley's hand hovered near her holster, her voice sharp as glass. You've got 5 seconds to show ID, or we're escorting you out. Every fork froze. Every conversation died. At the center of it all sat a man in a charcoal hoodie, exhausted eyes meeting the officer's glare with quiet, unshaken calm. From behind the counter, Amy Gates stepped forward, 25, freckles across her nose, wearing a navy apron with small sunflower embroidery. Her voice cut through the tension, firm and unwavering. He's a customer, same as anyone else. And unless drinking coffee is a crime now, you're out of line. What Amy didn't know was that the stranger she was defending was Billionaire CEO Charles Williams, and that one moment of courage was about to change everything. Amy Gates learned early that dignity wasn't given, it was claimed. She grew up in a cramped one-bedroom apartment above Riverside Laundromat in Stamford, Connecticut, where the dryers rattled all night and the scent of detergent clung to every surface. Her mother, Catherine, worked double shifts as an ER nurse at Mercy General in Akron, often coming home after midnight with tired eyes and aching shoulders. But she always kissed Amy's forehead, always whispered, "You're my sunlight, baby," before collapsing into sleep. Amy's father had left when she was 7. No note, no goodbye, just silence where a voice used to be. But Catherine filled that silence with strength, with old jazz records playing on Sunday mornings, and stories about the kind of woman Amy would become. Not wealthy, not famous, but grounded, fierce, unapologetic. By 16, Amy had memorized the sting of being underestimated. Teachers who seemed surprised when she spoke well. Store clerks who watched her hands too closely when she couldn't afford what was on the shelf. Customers at part-time jobs who treated her like furniture. She learned to stand tall through it all. Not because it didn't hurt, but because her mother taught her that bending wasn't the same as breaking. Her dream had always been simple. Open a bakery called Hearth and Time. Nothing grand, just a corner spot where people could come in, breathe deep, and feel safe. A place built on spiced sourdough, seasonal galettes, and the kind of warmth money couldn't buy. But college was too expensive. Loans felt like traps. So she waited tables instead, tucking every extra tip into a mason jar hidden under her bed, scribbling recipes into a leather notebook she carried everywhere. Right between her prayer journal and a photo of her and her mom, both in aprons, both smiling like the world hadn't touched them yet. Amy had learned to read people, their tone, their eyes, the way some looked at her and decided who she was before she even spoke. She'd heard it without hearing it. You're not supposed to shine in a place like this. But she did anyway, quietly. Consistently, pressed white shirts, clean sneakers always laced tight, rose-tinted lip balm she reapplied when she was nervous. Not for anyone else, for herself. For the version of herself her mother believed in. And maybe that's why, on that tense Tuesday morning when 2 officers walked into Brookside Diner and the room held its breath, Amy didn't hesitate. She had spent a lifetime walking through storms. This one was just another. The first warning came before dawn. Amy had barely made it down the stairs of her apartment when she saw the envelope taped to her door. No name, no stamp, just one word scribbled in red marker. Careful. Inside was a crumpled receipt from Brookside Diner, one of last night's tables, circled 3 times in black ink. Nothing else. She stood on the landing, rain dripping from the awning above, her heart pounding. Stamford wasn't a violent town, not on the surface. But silence here had a way of cutting deeper than any threat. People didn't scream. They withdrew. They isolated. They let you know you weren't welcome by erasing you. One convenience at a time. By noon, the shift at the diner confirmed her fears. Regulars she'd served for years suddenly avoided her section. Others stared longer than necessary, like they were waiting for her to crack. Her manager, Peter Crouch, pulled her aside near the dish pit. His glasses slid down his nose as he folded his arms. "You've got a lot of eyes on this place," he muttered. "Word is, you picked a side." Amy raised an eyebrow. "I picked a person." Peter's jaw tightened. "Well, that person's about to cost us regulars." "People talk, Amy. This isn't just about coffee anymore." She said nothing. He stepped closer. "You want to keep this job?" "I'd consider a statement. Something neutral. Just say the whole thing got blown out of proportion." Amy didn't blink. "I'm not taking it back." Peter exhaled through his nose. "Suit yourself, but don't come crying when your shifts start disappearing." That night, her landlord called, said the building needed urgent repairs. She had 30 days to vacate. When she asked why, his voice dropped. "You know why." Amy sat in her dim kitchen, staring at the ceiling fan that creaked like it had something to say. Her phone buzzed with texts, some supportive, some nervous. She didn't reply. She had made her choice. And deep down, she knew this wasn't just about one man, one moment, or one diner. This was about years of being told to stay quiet, to stay polite, to stay small. Amy wasn't doing that anymore, and the town had just noticed. While Amy scraped burnt cheese from a skillet in the back of the diner, the internet was setting her name on fire. Somewhere across town, inside a cluttered dorm room at Stanford State University, a student named Drake Peterson had uploaded a shaky 58-second video to TikTok. He'd recorded it discreetly the morning before, sitting 2 booths over with his noise-canceling headphones around his neck. The video showed Amy standing between 2 officers and a man in a charcoal hoodie, refusing to back down. Her voice wasn't raised. Her posture didn't shift. She stood like a wall. Drake captioned it, "This waitress just stood up to cops for a man nobody else would have looked twice at. Protect Amy Gates." By the time Amy clocked in the next morning, the video had crossed 1.2 million views. Within hours, it was everywhere. Instagram Reels, Facebook shares, Twitter threads, news blogs with titles like "The Woman Who Said No to Injustice in a Diner Booth" and "Amy Gates, the Waitress Who Wouldn't Let Power Win." Influencers reposted it with tears in their captions. Journalists were already reaching out to Drake, asking for contact info. Hashtags like #StandWithAmy, #ProtectWorkingWomen, and #CoffeeAndCourage started trending. And all the while, Amy was wiping down menus, unaware that millions of people had just seen her do what she thought was ordinary. At Brookside, the morning rush came and went. A few more curious eyes than usual. A couple strangers whispering in the back booth. But nobody said anything to her directly. Not yet. Her phone sat in the break room charging. She hadn't checked social media in 2 days. She was too tired, too drained, too busy dodging judgment in real life to worry about the virtual one. At 11:15 a.m., Peter walked by and grunted, "You're famous now." He didn't say it like a compliment. He said it like a warning. Amy blinked. "What?" Peter shoved his phone toward her. "You're all over the internet. Hope that video's worth it. When the real reporters show up." She stared at the screen. Her own face looked back, eyes firm, shoulders square. She set the phone down. "I was just doing my job." Peter scoffed. "Yeah, well, now it's everybody's business." Outside, the clouds were gathering again. But the storm had already started. On the 10th floor of a private suite at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, Charles Williams stood at the window, arms crossed, eyes locked on the skyline. It was almost evening. The sun dipped low behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the glass. But his thoughts weren't on the view. They were on a waitress with fire in her voice. Behind him, machines beeped in a slow, steady rhythm. His daughter Lily was asleep again. The surgery had gone well. The doctors were hopeful. But Charles couldn't shake the feeling in his chest, like something was still unfinished. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to a name he hadn't called in weeks, and tapped it. His executive assistant, Avery, answered on the second ring. "Yes, sir." Charles didn't waste time. "I need a full background on a woman named Amy Gates. She works at Brookside Diner in Stanford." "Waitress." There was a brief pause. "Understood. Any specific reason?" "She stood between me and 2 police officers like she didn't care if the world burned down," he said quietly. "Didn't know who I was. Didn't ask. She just did it." Avery's voice steadied. "You want me to reach out?" Charles shook his head, though she couldn't see him. "Not yet. I don't want her knowing. Not until I do this right." He turned from the window, sat at the edge of the hospital bed. Lily stirred slightly. Charles reached out, brushed a hand over her curls, still tangled from days of worry. She looked peaceful now, and he owed part of that peace to Amy. "She reminded me of my mother," he added, voice quieter. "Didn't flinch. Didn't smile to be liked. Just did the right thing." "I'll get her file to you by morning," Avery replied. "Do you want me to brief legal or press?" "No," Charles said firmly. "This isn't about publicity. It's personal." Another pause. "And Avery?" "Yes. I want her protected." Quietly. "I don't care what it costs. If anyone comes for her, I want her covered before she even hears footsteps." "Understood." Charles hung up. The phone sat heavy in his palm. For years, he'd learned how to measure people, in contracts, in negotiations, in how quickly they recognized his worth. But Amy hadn't measured him at all. She saw a man, and now it was time the world saw her. The next morning, Stanford woke up buzzing. At Brookside Diner, Amy arrived early. She didn't bother checking her phone. The notifications were too overwhelming. All she knew was that something felt different. Peter was already behind the counter, wiping down glasses that didn't need cleaning. He kept glancing at the door like he was waiting for someone, not someone local. The first customers of the day weren't regulars. 2 men in polos and dark jeans sat at the far end and didn't even open the menu. One of them whispered something into his smartwatch, At 9:07 a.m., a tall man in a sharp navy suit walked in. His shoes looked like they'd never touched gravel. His briefcase had a gold clasp. He paused at the door, scanned the room, and walked right back out. Peter finally said it. "You seeing this?" Amy nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm seeing it." By mid-morning, a delivery van pulled up outside. No logo. Just matte black with tinted windows. Two people stepped out, wheeling a heavy metal case through the front door. Inside, a brand-new commercial-grade espresso machine, still wrapped in plastic. "Is there an Amy Gates here?" one of them asked. Amy blinked. "Yeah. I'm Amy. This is for you. Installation's been pre-scheduled. Paid in full. No return address." Peter stared at the machine like it had fallen from the sky. Then came the next visitor, a woman, late 30s, dressed in all black with a clipboard and Bluetooth earpiece. She walked in, looked around, and handed Amy an envelope. "This is from Mr. Williams. Personal delivery." Before Amy could say a word, the woman turned and walked right back out. Amy didn't open it. Not yet. She stood there, envelope in hand, the quiet hum of the espresso machine buzzing behind her. Outside, more heads turned toward the diner. Some curious, some cautious. The town that once ignored her was now watching. And something big was coming. The lunch crowd had barely begun to trickle in when Amy finally tore open the envelope. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the contents at the back booth, away from prying eyes. Inside wasn't just a letter. It was a lifetime. A check. Not for $100. Not even $1,000. $75,000. Made out to Amy Gates, with a handwritten note clipped to it in elegant script. "For what you've already carried, and for what you still dream of building." Beneath that were documents, legal papers with official seals, a title transfer for commercial property at 1847 Bedford Street, Stamford, paid in full. Her name typed clearly at the top, and at the very bottom, a lease agreement for commercial kitchen equipment and a 1-year operational grant from something called the CW Community Trust. Amy's vision blurred. She blinked hard, but the tears came anyway. Silent, steady, unstoppable. Peter appeared at her elbow, his voice cautious. "Amy, you all right?" She couldn't speak. She just shook her head and slid the papers back into the envelope, clutching it against her chest like it might vanish. That's when the bell above the door chimed, and everything stopped. He stood in the doorway like he owned the moment, not with arrogance, but with the kind of quiet power that didn't need to announce itself. Charles Williams. No hoodie this time. No exhaustion masking his features. He wore a tailored navy suit that fit like it had been sewn onto him. Crisp white shirt open at the collar, no tie. His beard was trimmed perfectly. His posture was straight but relaxed. And his eyes, those same tired eyes from 2 days ago, now carried something else. Gratitude. The diner went silent. Forks clattered onto plates. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the sizzle from the kitchen seemed to hush. Peter's mouth fell open. One of the customers whispered, "Is that Charles Williams?" Someone else breathed. Amy stood slowly from the booth, envelope still in her hands, heart hammering against her ribs. Charles walked toward her, steady and deliberate, his expensive shoes clicking softly against the black and white checkered floor. When he reached her, he stopped, hands at his sides, and for a moment he just looked at her, really looked at her, like he was memorizing her face. "Miss Gates," he said quietly. His voice was deep, measured, warm. "I'm Charles." Amy swallowed hard. I know who you are now. I know you do." A faint smile touched his lips. "But 2 days ago you didn't, and that's what mattered." The diner was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the back. Charles glanced around the room, then back at her. "You stood between me and 2 officers when you thought I was nobody. You risked your job, your safety, your peace, and you did it because it was right." Amy's throat tightened. "You were being treated unfairly." "I was," Charles agreed. "And you were the only one who said so." He gestured to the envelope in her hands. "That's not charity, Amy. That's investment. I've spent my career identifying value that others overlook. And when I sat in that booth 2 mornings ago, I saw something rare." He paused. "I saw integrity. The kind you can't buy. The kind you can't fake." Amy's voice cracked. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Charles replied gently. "But I do need to ask you something." She nodded, unable to speak. "What's the name of your bakery?" Amy blinked, confused. It's just a dream." "I don't." "What's the name?" he repeated, softer this time. She hesitated, then whispered, "Hearth and Time." Charles smiled, a real smile this time, one that reached his eyes. "That's a good name. Strong, warm, rooted." He stepped back slightly, his voice carrying now so the whole diner could hear. "The property on Bedford Street is yours. The equipment's being delivered this week, and if you'll accept it, I'd like to offer you a no-interest microloan through my foundation to cover your first year of operations, ingredients, staffing, utilities, everything. Gasps rippled through the diner. Amy's knees felt weak. Why? Because you reminded me what power is supposed to be used for, Charles said simply. Not to silence people, not to intimidate, but to lift. He glanced around the room again, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces. And because this town needs to remember that courage doesn't wear a price tag. Peter stood frozen behind the counter, his face pale. Charles turned to him. Mr. Crouch, is it? Peter nodded mutely. You've got a good employee here, Charles said evenly. I'd suggest you remember that. Then he looked back at Amy, his expression softening. You protected me when I felt powerless. Now it's my turn. Amy's tears spilled over. She didn't try to stop them. Thank you, she whispered. Charles extended his hand. Thank you, Ms. Gates. She shook it, her small hand engulfed in his firm, steady grip. And then, just as quietly as he'd arrived, Charles Williams turned and walked out of Brookside Diner, leaving behind a room full of people who would never forget what they'd just witnessed. 3 days later, Officer Kate Ashley walked into the diner. No uniform, no badge on display, just jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and the kind of posture that comes when someone's carrying the weight of their own conscience. Amy was refilling napkin dispensers when she saw her. Her body tensed instinctively, but she didn't move. Kate approached slowly, stopped a few feet away, and cleared her throat. Amy. Amy turned, her expression guarded. Officer. Kate, the woman corrected quietly. Just Kate. I'm off duty. Amy said nothing. Kate shifted her weight, glanced down at her hands, then forced herself to meet Amy's eyes. I came to apologize. The words hung in the air. I watched the video, Kate continued, her voice thick. About 100 times, and every time I watched it I felt sicker. Because I was there. I stood there, and I let it happen. Amy crossed her arms. You didn't just let it happen. You were part of it. I know. Kate's voice cracked. I know, and I can't take it back. But I can tell you that I was wrong. I was so wrong. Why? Amy asked, her voice hard. Why did you do it? Kate exhaled shakily. Because I've been trained to see threats before I see people. Because I made an assumption based on how someone looked instead of what they were actually doing. Because I was lazy. And scared. And I took the easy route instead of the right one. Amy didn't respond. I've requested de-escalation training for our precinct, Kate said quietly. And I've spoken to my sergeant about bias awareness programs. It's not enough. I know that. But it's a start. It's a start. Amy echoed, her voice softer now. Kate nodded. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that I see what I did, and I'm going to spend the rest of my career making sure I never do it again. Amy studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, she uncrossed her arms. Accountability matters more than apologies. I know, Kate said. Then show me. Kate nodded, her eyes glistening. I will. She turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, you were right. And I should have been standing next to you instead of against you. Amy watched her walk out, and for the first time in days, she felt something loosen in her chest. By the end of the week, Drake Peterson's documentary dropped. It wasn't long, just 12 minutes, but it was everywhere. He called it The Waitress Who Wouldn't Move. It opened with the raw footage from the diner, unedited, unfiltered. Amy's voice, calm and unwavering. The officer's aggression, the stunned silence of the crowd. Then it cut to interviews, customers who'd been there, townspeople who'd turned their backs on Amy, even Peter, who admitted on camera that he'd been wrong to pressure her. But the most powerful moment came at the end. Charles Williams appeared on screen, sitting in a simple chair against a plain background, his daughter Lily asleep on a hospital bed behind him. I'm a billionaire, Charles said quietly. I've built companies. I've closed deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I've been on magazine covers and keynote stages. But 2 days ago, in a diner in Stamford, Connecticut, I was just a black man in a hoodie, being treated like a criminal. He paused, his jaw tight, and a 25-year-old waitress named Amy Gates was the only person in that room who saw me as human. The screen faded to black, and then white text appeared. Courage doesn't wait for permission. It acts. Within 48 hours, the documentary had over 10 million views. Catherine arrived at the diner on a Saturday morning, still in her scrubs from the night shift. Amy was wiping down tables when she looked up and saw her mother standing in the doorway, eyes red-rimmed but smiling. Mom! Amy's voice was small. Catherine crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her daughter into a fierce hug. I'm so proud of you, she whispered into Amy's hair. So proud. Amy's composure finally shattered. She buried her face in her mother's shoulder and sobbed, deep, shuddering sobs that had been building for days. Catherine held her, rocking her gently, whispering, "You stood tall, baby. Just like I taught you. You stood tall." When Amy finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and her eyes were swollen, but she was smiling. "I'm scared, Mom." "I know. What if I can't do it? What if the bakery fails? What if?" "Then you'll try again," Catherine said firmly. "But you're not going to fail. You know why?" Amy shook her head. "Because you've been baking your whole life, sweetheart. Not just bread. You've been baking resilience. And that doesn't burn." Joanna found Amy in the kitchen later that afternoon. The older woman was covered in flour as usual, her floral bandana slightly askew, her hands moving instinctively as she kneaded dough. "You're really doing it," Joanna said, not looking up. "The bakery." "Yeah," Amy said quietly. "I think I am." Joanna nodded slowly, then set the dough aside and wiped her hands on her apron. She turned to Amy, her expression serious. "I want in." Amy blinked. "What?" "I want to work for you," Joanna said. "When you open Hearth and Time, I want to be there. Head baker. Whatever you need." Amy's throat tightened. "Joanna, you've been here for 20 years. And I'm tired," Joanna interrupted. "Tired of working for people who don't see me. Tired of cooking food that doesn't mean anything. You're building something that matters. And I want to be part of it." Tears welled in Amy's eyes. "I'd be honored." Joanna smiled, pulling Amy into a brief, tight hug. "Good. Now stop crying and go check on your new kitchen. I hear they started construction this morning." Amy walked the 2 blocks to Bedford Street in a daze. When she turned the corner and saw the building, she stopped dead. The old, abandoned restaurant space she'd walked past 100 times was now surrounded by scaffolding. Workers in hard hats moved in and out, carrying materials, shouting instructions. A large sign hung across the front, "Hearth and Time, opening soon." Amy's knees buckled. She grabbed the lamppost beside her for support. "Miss Gates?" She turned. A woman in a sharp blazer and clipboard approached, smiling. "I'm Monica, project manager for CW Development. We're ahead of schedule. Electrical's done, plumbing's almost finished, and the ovens arrive Monday." Amy could barely process the words. "This is real." Monica's smile widened. "Very real. Mr. Williams asked me to tell you that if you have any design preferences, paint colors, layout changes, anything, we're here to make it happen." Amy nodded numbly. "Thank you." "No," Monica said gently. "Thank you. It's an honor to build something like this." 2 weeks later, Charles returned. This time, he wasn't alone. Amy was inside the new kitchen space, running her hand over the gleaming stainless steel counters. When she heard the door open behind her, she turned and froze. Charles stood in the doorway, smiling, and beside him, holding his hand, was a small girl with wide hazel eyes and a cream-colored knit blanket wrapped around her thin shoulders. "Lily." "Amy," Charles said warmly, "I'd like you to meet my daughter." Lily stepped forward shyly, clutching something in her free hand. She looked up at Amy with a solemn expression, then held out a folded piece of paper. "I made this for you," she said softly. Amy knelt down, taking the paper carefully. She unfolded it. It was a drawing, crayon and colored pencil, of a woman in an apron, standing in front of an oven, pulling out a tray of golden bread. Above her head, in wobbly child's handwriting, were the words, "The Brave Baker." Amy's vision blurred. She looked up at Lily, then at Charles, unable to speak. "She wanted to meet you," Charles said quietly. "She asked me every day when she could." Lily nodded earnestly. "Daddy said you were brave. Like a superhero, but with bread." Amy laughed through her tears. "I'm not a superhero, sweetheart." "Yes, you are," Lily insisted. "You helped my daddy when he was sad. That's what superheroes do." Amy pulled the little girl into a gentle hug. "Thank you, Lily. This is the most beautiful thing anyone's ever given me." When she stood, Charles was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. "She's recovering well," he said. "The surgery was successful. We're cleared to go home next week." "I'm so glad," Amy whispered. Charles glanced around the kitchen, taking in the shining equipment, the freshly painted walls, the large windows letting in afternoon sunlight. "This is going to be something special." "It already is," Amy said. The grand opening of Hearth and Time was set for the first Saturday in October. The entire town showed up. Amy stood behind the counter in her flour-dusted apron, Joanna beside her in a matching one, both of them grinning as the line stretched out the door and down the block. Catherine sat at a corner table, beaming with pride. Drake Peterson stood near the window with his camera, capturing everything. Peter Crouch, who'd quietly apologized the week before, waited patiently in line with his wife. And at a booth near the back, Charles Williams sat with Lily, both of them eating cinnamon rolls and smiling. Officer Kate Ashley walked in halfway through the morning, carrying a small potted plant. She set it on the counter without a word, nodded at Amy, and left. The card attached read, "Thank you for teaching me what courage looks like." As the sun climbed higher, and the bakery filled with laughter and warmth and the scent of fresh bread, Amy looked around and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because everything was easy now, not because the fight was over, but because she'd stood up when it mattered, and because, in doing so, she'd reminded an entire community what it meant to see people, really see them, beyond assumptions, beyond uniforms, beyond wealth, or the lack of it. She saw Charles glance up and catch her eye. He raised his coffee cup slightly in a silent toast. Amy smiled and raised hers in return. And in that moment, surrounded by the people she loved, and the dream she'd built with her own hands, Amy Gates understood something her mother had been trying to teach her all along. Dignity isn't given. It's claimed, and once you claim it, no one can ever take it away. If you enjoyed this story, we'd appreciate it if you rated it from 1 to 10. Support us with a like, and subscribe to our channel, Twister Stories. Comment from what place you're watching us. Thanks for your unconditional support in every story. Blessings to you and your family.